there, everybody. I am Scott Chambers, and I'm one of the trainers here at the PCI Security Standards Council. And for many years, I was an assessor. And so I've been part of lots and lots and lots of assessments over the years. And I'm here to talk to you about the huge impact that ISA training can have within your organizations. For many of us, PCI DSS sometimes feels like a yearly fire drill, like an emergency situation, right? The assessor arrives, the teams scramble, we're having meetings every day, evidence is missing, and everybody is stressed. But then suddenly, on top of all of these existing stressful things that are happening, there are non-compliant findings. And now, in addition to the ongoing assessment, we're actively trying to fix problems, changing processes, finding technical solutions, all while under enormous time pressure. We're trying to roll out patches or implement a new scanning tool and trying to finish the retesting before that report deadline. It's expensive. It's disruptive, and it can sometimes feel like compliance is something that's being done to you as opposed to being something that's been done with you. But the good news is, I'm here to tell you, it does not have to be like that. What if PCI wasn't once a year? What if the PCI knowledge lived inside your business, inside your own teams, instead of being driven by external consultants? What if compliance wasn't a mad scramble, but instead was baked into everyday operations? Well, the good news is, I'm here to tell you, that's what can happen when you invest in your people with ISA training. Let's stop for a moment. Picture an ISA. What comes to your mind? What are they doing? What do they look like? Are they an assessor? Are they the person that manages the assessment? Are they meeting with the QSA? Are they gathering evidence? Are they filling out compliance forms? Actually, all of these things are correct. That has been the traditional role of an ISA, and it's an important role. But if that's all you think ISAs are for, then I'm here to tell you you're missing a great opportunity. ISAs are indispensable for an assessment. They can gather and organize evidence all year round. So when the QSA shows up, it's ready to go. Policies and procedures are handed over on the first call. Diagrams, flowcharts, they're all available instantly. Logs have been gathered in advance, and the interviews have been arranged. The ISAs act as compliance champions within the organization, helping their colleagues to understand and implement requirements. They're part of the project teams, shifting compliance left into that design stage. And of course, the ISAs are subject matter experts on all things PCI, providing answers and resources internally without having to constantly reach out to the QSA company, which can be a bit of a bottleneck sometimes. They know what's coming with PCI, and they help us prepare. They help us to adjust for the big changes that are coming down the road, things like PCI DSS version 4 when it came along. They scope environments more accurately, and oftentimes they even find ways to eliminate scope, avoiding wasted effort. And ISAs can be positioned throughout an organization, making PCI part of business as usual. So we all know security is not a once and done thing. But it's what our frontline people are constantly doing. And ISA's familiarity with the requirements means that they can incorporate security into their day-to-day activities. Arguably, one of the most powerful roles of an ISA is the role of translator. Think about it. QSAs might see over a dozen organizations every year. Do they really remember the intricate details about your business, your custom systems, your acronyms, your corporate language? Do they know what systems you've retired or brought online this year? Probably not. But your ISAs do. ISAs translate QSA speak into language your organization understands. And they can also translate it back so QSAs understand the unique context of the business. And trust me, that's a big deal. Have you ever been in one of those tech meetings where you hear something like, "We can't throw the TPS reports in the data lake because the Kafka won't authenticate to our S3 buckets." And you just think to yourself, "Oh my goodness, who understands this lingo?" Well, your ISAs do. And they can explain, here's what the system does, here's how it maps to the PCI requirements. They can also take QSA feedback and explain that in plain language to your teams. And when QSAs rotate, one comes one year, but a different one the next, the ISAs provide continuity, carrying your institutional PCI knowledge year to year. And again, that makes a huge difference. They know the history of the controls that have been implemented and why they were implemented. They know, for example, that the database must talk to the mainframe using an unencrypted connection, but they also know that we have a compensating control in place that covers it, and they can point the assessor to where that's documented. And let's just say that the new QSA has a different opinion about that compensated control. Well, in that situation, I know that I would want an ISA advocating for my company, pointing to the requirement, the guidance, and the FAQs that we relied upon when we built that control, and how our testing shows that it meets the objective. And importantly, explaining all of that to the QSA in terms that they understand. What are the results of all of this? Faster assessments. With evidence prepped and fewer surprises, the ISAs know the vulnerability scans got done and they know where the evidence is to prove it. Cheaper assessments using less QA time with fewer delays. Smarter compliance because PCI knowledge was applied at the design stage, catching issues early and saving rework later. Smarter compliance decisions. When you empower ISAs, you save time and you save money, and PCI becomes less painful and far more effective. Let me talk about what this looks like in real life. This is WestJet. WestJet is a Canadian airline with 20-plus payment channels and 40-plus teams. They faced a huge challenge when they were preparing for PCI DSS version 4. And I can see why. Airlines and universities are possibly some of the most difficult environments for PCI. They have to integrate with or support entities that they have little control over. Payments at WestJet are complex. So many channels. Guests can pay online. They can pay in the airports. They can pay in flight. And when they're doing that, they're using infrastructure that spans multiple service providers. Sure, some of their systems are simple, like the point-to-point encrypted POS, but others are messy. Shared airport services with multiple third-party providers who often don't even think that they're in scope for PCI. That complexity creates bottlenecks. And WestJet knew they needed a baseline of PCI knowledge throughout their organization to get them through this. And so instead of putting all of the burden on their GRC team, they trained over 30 ISAs across the business. Not 2, not 3, 30, 30. They pulled in architects, developers, project management managers, payment teams, and of course GRC as well, but not all of these people had experience with compliance. Not all of them had experience with security. Some of them were not involved in the technology sphere. And sure, not all of them decided to take the final exam and become qualified as an ISA, but there was one thing that all of them walked away with, and that was a deep PCI DSS awareness. PCI within WestJet was no longer siloed in compliance. It became embedded across the business. Here's what happened. The benefits were immediate. Bottlenecks were removed. Projects no longer stalled waiting for GRC input. Silos broke down. Teams began to see PCI from new perspectives. With their newfound awareness, people began to notice compliance issues within their own business units, within their own business areas. They had PCI in mind from the start, not bolted on at the end. They started to point out how compliance might affect new systems, heading off future conflicts. They were all speaking the same language from a shared base of knowledge. And PCI within that organization went from having a perception of being a blocker to being an enabler. One of WestJet's company values is work together to win. And that's exactly what happened during the ISA training. WestJet decided to have our corporate training. And that means they had an in-person class just for their organization hosted within their facilities. And that's fantastic for getting that team building effect. They invited people from across the company. They all spent 2 days together. They were learning, they were doing exercises, they were eating lunch together, they were talking together. There were people from parts of the business meeting people from other parts of the business they'd never met before. It was a great networking opportunity as well for this one organization. They built a sense of camaraderie and a shared understanding. And they all realized just how broad PCI's scope was and how they could tackle it as a team. Now, one of the things that we trainers find intriguing, fascinating, and we love to see is that moment when people in a class figure out the solution right in front of us. And it's not because of us, it's just because in that scenario, they had the right people in the room to ask their question and get the right answer. PCI at WestJet is no longer just compliance. It's now part of their culture. So now they're compliant. What are those ISAs doing? Well, today, Those 30 ISAs are PCI champions within their own departments. They're planning for the future assessments. They're preparing the evidence, and they're coordinating with the assessors. They're educating their colleagues. They're scoping smarter. They're keeping systems out when they can. They're shifting compliance left, catching issues during design, not after go-live. They're saving money, they're saving time, and they're making PCI sustainable within that organization. That is the power of champions. That is the power of ISAs. Heading off issues before they become problems. You can achieve the same benefits for your organization. But to do it, you have to give your staff the tools they need to succeed. Without training, PCI responsibility often falls on people who don't have the skills or understanding needed. Students often tell us when they come to class, PCI was thrown at me. I'm trying my best. I'm trying to make sense of it. And when they finally leave the class, they're really excited because they feel like they finally have the knowledge and the tools they need to be successful in that role. Generally speaking, after ISA training, the students are more competent, they're definitely more confident, and they're in all of their PCI responsibilities. And of course, they should be, because they get exactly the same training as the QSAs. The topics, the materials, the slides, the exercises, they're all the same. In fact, the main difference between an ISA class and a QSA class tends to be the questions that we get asked by the students. A manager in one of my old client organizations once said to me, he said, of course I am going to send my staff to ISA class. Why wouldn't I arm my staff with the same training and knowledge as the external assessors? He said, it just makes sense. In terms of course format, the council offers the ISA course in various different ways. We have an entirely online e-learning, self-paced method, which suits a lot of people. We have the same, but with an added virtual in-person instructor-led session where you go online and you have somebody like me who you can ask questions, get answers, and we can have a little bit of teamwork in that class scenario. But then we have my favorite, and the favorite of my colleagues, that is those in-person training classes where you come to class and we're all there together. I mean, all of these options are great, but face-to-face is definitely my favorite. We get interaction, we get engagement. In classes, you get to meet people, interesting people from all kinds of industries and backgrounds that are interested in PCI. From pen testers to project managers to the finance person. Sometimes the most powerful lesson in those classrooms doesn't come from the instructor, but rather another student, somebody who has faced the same challenges. And the students seem to love it. After initial class qualification, ISAs can maintain that qualification entirely online year after year. But what I can tell you is many choose to return to class. Because again, year after year, my colleagues and myself, we see the same familiar faces coming back for a refresher. Many recently have been returning to keep up to date with PCI DSS version 4 changes. But I had a guy in a class recently, and I asked him, you've been here for 3 years in a row. Why do you keep coming back? And he said to me, he said, I love coming back. He said, I love the networking experience. I love speaking to all of these people because although he came back every year, the people in the class changed. He met new people, interesting people. They network, they learn about each other's organizations. They learn about the challenges each are facing and how they're dealing with those. He said, and every year I come back, he said, I learn at least one new thing from the course content. He said, and that one thing is often valuable in itself. So people seem to like coming back. So, how can you get this started? How can you get these same benefits that WestJet got? Well, there's a QR code here, and it's over here. And our students will attest to the fact that we love QR codes. This particular one is a link to the training and qualification page on the PCI SSC website. But if you don't like QR codes, don't worry. It's fairly easy to find. You go to our website, look for training and qualification, and dig down in there. That's where you'll find information about ISA classes. And you'll find out how to sign up, how to schedule them, prices, everything. But you'll also find in there lots of information about our other courses. Because remember, it's not just PCI DSS. There's a whole world of standards and technologies out there. We have classes about point-to-point encryption, PIN security, 3D secure, secure software, all of these other cool things that we love to talk about. So these classes, they're open to anyone who's interested, anyone who wants to know how these things work, not just assessors, but implementers, developers, anyone who's interested. And we call this knowledge training. Take the class alongside the assessors. Get to know what the assessors know. Put you in a great position for those assessments. You can also see here an image of our ISA Credly badge, which ISAs are eligible to use. Another way to demonstrate and show off their new certification. Who doesn't want a few extra letters after their name, eh? And you get some CPEs too. Way! All right, the council also creates some custom courses. Recently, one of my colleagues, Mark Bayercola, infamous now because of our PCI DSS training videos, was in North Carolina, where we had a combined PCIP, point-to-point encryption, and PIN security class that we tailored specifically for the ATM department of a large bank out there. And at the end of that class, the students were quite literally running around the class, delivering pieces of paper to each other, pretending to be cryptographic key components, learning, but at the same time having an absolute blast. Great fun. So to bring it home, PCI does not have to feel like a fire drill. With ISA training, you can get PCI embedded within your teams, your processes, your organizational culture. It's faster, it's cheaper, it's smarter. So we are, as WestJet would say, working together to win. Thank you.